Today, we're tackling a problem that so many bilingual families face. It's this incredible puzzle. You do everything you can think of to pass on a second language to your child, but they just won't speak it back to you. And man, can that be frustrating?
This comment from a parent, it just perfectly captures that feeling, right? That sense of helplessness. You're speaking the language, you're reading the books, playing the songs, and all you get back is the majority language. You can't help but wonder, what am I doing wrong? Is my kid rejecting this part of our family?
So, yeah, why does this happen? Is it just the kid's personality? Or are we not trying hard enough? Well, the great news is that researchers have been digging into this exact question. And the answer, well, it's both way simpler and a lot more complex than you might think. Let's get into it. Okay, so the big secret here isn't some magic trick or one specific method you have to follow. It's actually about taking a step back and looking at the big picture, the entire world of language that your child is basically swimming in every single day. The key concept we need to wrap our heads around comes from the work of Dr. Anik DeHauer, and it's called the language input environment. This is so important. It's not just about what you, the parent, say to your child. It's the grand total of every single word they hear from everyone all day long. Think of it like their total language diet. Let me give you a really powerful example. This is the story of a little boy named Sven. He was born in Cairo, totally fluent in Arabic, which he learned from his nanny. But then his family moved to Brussels. His Arabic input, it just vanished completely. And by the time he was 4.5, he couldn't even understand his old nanny anymore. The environment changed and the language just faded away with it. And this story about Lauren's dad drives the point home even more. See, he spoke English to her, but he was pretty much the only person who did. So the total amount of English she was hearing just wasn't enough for her to become an active, confident speaker. And the heartbreaking part? He took it personally. He thought she was rejecting him, when really it was just an issue of an imbalanced language diet. The minority language was just being drowned out. So all this brings us to the most famous strategy out there, right? The one that families, like the one in that first comment, often follow with so much dedication. We're talking about the one parent, one language strategy, or OPAL. You've heard of it. It sounds so clean, so perfect in theory. One parent is the dedicated source for that minority language. But here's the kicker. When you look at the research, it is far from a magic bullet. In fact, there was this huge study of over 1,000 bilingual families in Flanders, and the results were, frankly, pretty eye-opening. They found that even in homes actively trying to raise bilingual kids, a full 25%, that's 1 in every 4 children, ended up speaking only the majority language. Now, this is where it gets really fascinating. Look at this table. See that top row? When both parents use the minority language at home, the chance of the child speaking it is high. Makes sense. But look at the classic strict OPAL strategy. It only has a moderate chance of success. About the same as when one parent does OPAL and the other just kind of mixes languages. The takeaway here is crystal clear. The more total input a child gets in that minority language, the better their odds are. Okay, so if more input is the name of the game, what about mixing languages? Code switching. This is something a lot of parents really worry about. Right. So the common fear is that if you mix languages, you're just going to confuse your kid and totally mess up their development. But the scientific reality, it's a lot more complicated than that. Researchers are finding that the relationship between mixing and a child's development is actually pretty complex. So to figure this out, scientists started looking at something really cool called volubility. It's a fancy word, but it's simple. It's just how much a baby babbles and makes sounds. And it turns out this is a super powerful predictor of their language skills later on. So the question is, does hearing mixed languages affect how much a baby talks? Well, a recent study used these day-long audio recorders to listen in, and they found something pretty surprising. It wasn't the total number of mixed sentences that seemed to matter. It was the proportion. When mixed-up sentences made up a bigger percentage of the one-on-one language an infant heard, their volubility, their babbling, was actually a little bit lower. So, what is going on here? Well, researchers have 2 main ideas. The first is what they call the cognitive cost path. Maybe, just maybe, processing mixed sentences takes a tiny bit more brain power for a baby, leaving less energy for babbling. The other idea is the parental response path. This one suggests that maybe parents of babies who are naturally quieter tend to mix languages more, trying to use something new to get their attention. We don't know for sure which way it goes yet.
All right, let's zoom out for a second. Let's move from the home environment to a much bigger and honestly way more controversial claim you hear about bilingualism all the time. You've all seen the headlines about the bilingual advantage, right? The idea that speaking two languages is like a workout for your brain, making you better at focusing, multitasking, and problem solving. It's a really compelling idea, but is it actually true?
To get to the bottom of this, scientists can't just rely on one or two studies. They have to do these massive things called meta-analysis. I mean, look at this chart. They start with a huge number of studies, like over 40,000, and they systematically filter them down to find only the highest quality evidence. It's all about finding the real signal in a whole lot of noise.
And one of the biggest sources of noise they have to deal with is something called publication bias. Basically, it's a known fact that scientific journals are way more likely to publish exciting studies that find a positive result, like, hey, we found a bilingual advantage, than they are to publish boring studies that find no difference at all. So here's the crucial part. What happens when you use fancy statistical models to correct for that bias? Well, at first, it looks like there was a small but real advantage for bilinguals. But once you account for all those boring studies that probably never got published, that advantage, it tends to shrink a lot or even disappear completely. The so-called advantage might just be an illusion created by which studies we get to see.
Phew. Okay, so after looking at all this research, from the home environment to the great brain debate, where does that leave parents? What should we actually be focusing on? Let's bring it all home.
First, and this is probably the most important thing, let's stop stressing about finding one single, perfect, rigid strategy. The evidence is pretty clear that just sticking blindly to something like Opal is absolutely no guarantee of success. Here's what really matters. The strongest predictor of success is the total amount and the consistency of that minority language input. The more a child hears it in a natural way, the more likely they are to use it. Also, active back and forth conversation matters way more than just having a TV show on in the background. It's also true that talkative, engaged parents tend to raise talkative kids. And finally, please don't panic if your child's development in one language seems a little behind the other. That is totally normal. The only time to really be concerned is if their development seems very slow in both languages.
You know, when you put it all together, it really points to a much bigger, more beautiful question. The goal isn't just about teaching vocabulary. It's about building connection. So maybe the real question we should be asking ourselves is this. Beyond any single language, what does a truly rich, warm, and engaging communication environment really look like for a child? Thanks for watching.